It is Monday, November 16th, 2020. We are on our 8th lesson of Unit 2, where we're going to look at the interconnectedness of the pre-1600 civilizations in the Americas. And our lesson objectives today are: I can identify where pre-1600 civilizations in the Americas were located, and I can describe how interconnected pre-1600 civilizations in the Americas were. So I want to review our geographic context since we have shifted where we're looking and where we're studying in the world as we were looking at Africa, but now we were just focused on North America and South America. And specifically looking at North America and South America, we are looking at the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca civilizations. So, the Maya existed prior to the Inca and the Aztec, but the Inca and the Aztec, they existed basically for like the same amount of time. There's just like a slight difference between when they rose and when they fell, which I think is kind of interesting. So let's sort of refresh ourselves from what we learned on Friday as to how humans even sort of arrived in the Americas to begin with. So as a reminder, one of the reasons, the first reason why humans arrived in North and South America is because people migrated following herds of animals from Africa north into Europe, east to Asia, and continued northeast, bringing them to across the Bering Strait, and then headed south from North America, continued heading south into South America. So again, they were following herds of animals. And then that second reason is that Spanish ships, and I'm going to say other Europeans, started arriving in the Americas between the 1400s and the 1500s. It's later in the 1400s when Europeans started arriving in the Americas. So today we're predominantly going to focus on studying maps and seeing the information that we can gain from maps in understanding, where the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca were located, but also understanding like how actually connected the Maya, Aztec, and Inca were to each other and to the rest of the world. So we're going to start off by looking at this map where it's just the Maya, and that's because the Maya existed before the Aztec and Inca rose and fell in North and South America. The Maya are located in this area of predominantly Mexico in North America. And we can see how basically the Atlantic Ocean has separated the Maya from the rest of the world, where we see, other empires and other kingdoms that are pretty interconnected. If we look at the map, we can see what the solid line means, the dotted, the bigger dash, big dash, small dot, so on and so forth, what these lines mean over here, because there were a lot of trade routes, and the world, between Africa, Asia, and Europe was very interconnected in the year 750, as compared to if we look at the Maya civilization, they just are part of the Mesoamerican trade routes, which is a local trade route to the people just living in this region. So the Maya were basically limited to themselves and maybe some other very, very small groups of people that lived there. But the Maya were they were the largest group that was in this area. Moving on to map B, which is in the year 1435, now we see the Aztec, now we see the Inca. Aztec is also located in North America, just like the Maya was. The Maya would have been here if they still existed during this time period. And the Inca is in South America. And then when we look sort of at, again, Africa, Asia, and Europe, we see how there's, I would say it's like even busier during this time period. We were learning about the Songhai last week, and we know how interconnected the Songhai was with the rest of the world because its kings, converted to Islam because of traders that were coming into the region. And they did this because the kings wanted to convert to Islam because they wanted to be connected to Asia. They wanted to be connected to Europe. They wanted to have that, commonality because it provided them a lot of economic opportunities, among many other things. But again, we see how the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, since the world is a globe, we know that this Pacific Ocean is what this is over here, but we see that, the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean are really kind of protecting, keeping the Aztec and the Inca Empire separated from Europe, specifically Europe. And we'll learn later on that what is common between the Aztec and the Inca is that it's the arrival of Europeans that really we can attribute to the fall of both of those empires. But what I think is very interesting is that even though these empires existed during a similar time period, if we look, we see again that it's the Mesoamerican trade routes that the Aztec Empire is predominantly part of. And then we also see that in the Inca, if we go and look at the map key, now it's the Andean trade routes because this is where the Andes Mountains are, so it was called the Andean trade routes. And what I find interesting is that there's nothing that connects these two. So what this map is telling me is that the Aztec and the Inca Empire were not trading with each other and they were not interconnected with each other. And that just like the Maya, neither of these empires at this time in 1435 were connected with Africa, Asia, or Europe. And, just for us to sort of have an idea of like hemispheres, because later on we're going to look at, different empires, different countries, and sort of place them in hemispheres and what continents they are on. So this is the map that you will use, but we know that the equator is what creates the northern hemisphere and what creates the southern hemisphere. And then the prime meridian is what creates the eastern hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere, which North America and South America are easily, clearly identifiable to be in the Western Hemisphere. It gets a little murky. There's parts of Europe that are considered in the Western Hemisphere. This would be like Portugal, Spain, France, Great Britain up here. And then Africa has just a little bit of its very large continent in the Western Hemisphere, but most of it is in the Eastern Hemisphere. Asia is clearly in the Eastern Hemisphere, and Australia is also clearly in the Eastern Hemisphere. So you can refer to this later on when we're doing a little, hemisphere and continent identifying activity. And just another reminder, there's really two predominant types of maps that we use as historians. The first is a political map, where it shows the geographic boundaries between governmental units such as countries, states, and counties. On a political map, which I would consider all of these maps to be political, you'll also see like the major bodies of water, or like if this was a present day map, we might see like a major highway, which we can then compare to a physical map, which is a map that shows the physical features on Earth's surface, which it's going to look something like this, where it's going to show us where there's mountain, lakes, deserts, rivers, forests. For instance, up here, which this is Greenland, it's like basically a big piece of ice and snow. So we can see, also like in the United States here, it's this darker brown color is like a desert, mountainy region, and then there's like more green, like forests and so on and so forth. So, just to remind us that there are political maps and there are physical maps. We're mostly looking and using political maps today. And part of us like understanding the connection between places is being able to explain the relative location, which relative location is a description of where a place is into relation to how a place is related to other places, which that definition makes no sense. So I provided some examples for us to really understand. So Isaac Newton Middle School, we know that that's this location, this little circle right here. It is west of the East River or Harlem River. So if we wanted to go from the Harlem River or the East River, we would have to go west to get to Isaac Newton Middle School. Here's another example. The state of New York is north of Pennsylvania. So if we were in Pennsylvania, we would have to go north to get here. And last but not least, Asia is northeast of Africa. So if we were in Africa, we would have to go north and then east. However, if we were trading, we would probably depending on where we were, we would go north up to here and then head over. But north or south always goes before east or west. So you don't say east south, you say southeast or northeast, northwest, or southwest. Okay? Northwest, just like Kim and Kanye's daughter. It's a good way for us to remember that. And, understanding how places are connected to each other and how they relate to each other really leads us into this idea of interconnectedness, which I know I've been mentioning throughout this entire mini lesson video. And we know that impact of interconnectedness is one of our enduring issues. And the maps that we looked at today to start us off are just sort of like the start of the story about like how later than 1435, map B, how later on in the 1400s, the interconnectedness within North and South America to especially Europe really changed. So again, interconnectedness is a state of regions and societies being connected or in contact with one another. For example, during the classical age, different regions were connected through the Silk Roads, which we could see on map B up here, where we could see the Silk Roads, and we can see, lots of information here, all right? So anyways, we're going to see impact of interconnectedness come up when we learn about the fall of the Aztec, when we learn about the fall of the Inca Empire. And just an example of an empire that was like very interconnected, and we're going to learn about the Ottoman Empire in Unit 4. This is map B for reference. According to map B, the Ottoman Empire was interconnected with Africa, Asia, and Europe through the Mediterranean Sea complex, the trans-Saharan trade routes, Indian Ocean complex, and Silk Roads. And I use the map key to be able to identify these. And the Ottoman Empire is spread across actually the continent of Africa, Asia, and Europe. The Ottoman Empire was huge, very interconnected. And again, we're going to learn more about them. But the Ottoman Empire would be an example from map B of a group of people that was very interconnected. So that concludes our mini lesson video. We're now going to move right on to starting our work in the pod, and we are on step 2, where you're going to answer questions 1 through 4. It's where you have about 5 minutes to do that, and in about 30 seconds, we will start that 5-minute timer. So head straight to this Jupyter pod right here.